What's up? What's up? You are hanging with the beast. Episode 10 of Give Me Back My 90s Music. And as you can hear by that wonderful intro, of course, the late great Mark Lanegan with the Screaming Trees, of course. We all know the unfortunate death of Mark Lanegan yesterday. As it was reported, he was only 57 years young. And it's funny, when I had seen the news, I hit up my buddy I'm always mentioning, Frank Ferry, who had actually hit me up. I just didn't see it on Instagram. And then I had gone back and forth with my brother in law, Chris Verano. And really sad to hear another unfortunate loss of a musician who, you know, was just so prominent in the 90s and even after. And I have to tell you the truth, I was not familiar with a lot of his solo work, although thanks to Chris Verano and Frank Ferry, they're always recently too, which is a very interesting, had been sending me a lot of his solo work and talking to me about him a lot more. And man, he seemed to really be a wonderful musician. That song from the Screaming Trees, "Nearly Lost You," again, I think that is one of the most prominent songs from the '90s. It was from the early '90s, of course, and it just went along so well for the time. And I think that if you weren't alive during that time, you probably don't know what I'm talking about. But if you were alive during that time, or if you were around during that time, I should say, and know, you'll know what I mean. That it was one of the many wonderful songs that filled that very special time for us, whom were growing up in the '90s, which was just a time I feel that is kind of cannot be duplicated and is frozen on the human being timeline, especially in terms of music. And this song, "Nearly Lost You," again, was one of those songs that you could always hear playing on the radio. You would always see the video for it rather. And again, it's one of the songs that you reflect back to when you really want to feel what it was like to feel in the '90s or have memories of the '90s. It's one of the many songs that came from that wonderful time. So very sorry to hear of this unfortunate loss. Um, I really actually had planned on listening to more of his solo work, which I see has just gotten so many wonderful compliments. Very interesting guy. Um, very submerged in music. Of course, he was part of that wonderful Seattle sound. Uh, Formed the Screaming Trees, and just amazing to be part of that great and wonderful scene again that can never be duplicated. And of course, I'm talking about Alice in Chains, Nirvana, Soundgarden, and Pearl Jam. I think that it's very rare in our time that we see a certain area just churn out so many wonderful artists in such a in such a short amount of time. And those groups, even the ones who I may not have mentioned, were so important on putting the Seattle scene on the map forever, for that matter, and for contributing to music as a whole. One of the very interesting things I had found out when reading more about Mark Lanegan was that, again, he had begun his musical career in the kind of early to mid '80s. So he was a gentleman who had also crossed over into the '90s, where they found a lot of uh, fame with the Screaming Trees. But, you know, I found that he collaborated. Something interesting was that he collaborated with various artists throughout his career, as everybody knows. But in the 1990s, he recorded an unreleased album with Kurt Cobain of Nirvana, He also joined Lane Stalley and Mike McCready of Pearl Jam in the wonderful band Mad Season. Again, I don't know if you want to call that what they call it, a super group or whatever, but phenomenal album, by the way. And then, of course, he was also part of Queens of the Stone Age, and then had a lot of great work in a solo career. He also wrote various books, which was very interesting. So, seems like a gentleman that, again, extremely intelligent, well versed in music, had a lot of other outlets, and it's a shame that he is no longer with us. And what I wanted to do with this episode, on the subject of the unfortunate death of Mark Lanegan, I wanted to talk about the many wonderful musicians that we have lost from the 90's. And when you think about it, it's almost it's in a sense it's too good to be true, because you had so much of this talent creating music and just breaking the barriers of music at that time. And so many of them are no longer with us, which is shocking. Although I guess one can say that it's something that isn't it unfortunately isn't really shocking, because we have seen so many wonderful musicians from certain times, primarily the 60's, who all passed away very early, um, or have passed away in general. Of course, what I'm talking about too is in reference to the 60's. I'm talking about Mama Cass of the Mamas and the Papas, Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones, and Jimi Hendrix, of course, Jim Morrison, so many others. And, it always brings to mind that 27 Club, if you're familiar with that. I've mentioned that a couple times. Again, there's a book my older brother Christian had uh, had bought that I had really been interested in, and I can't think of the name. I think it's called Hellhounds on Their Trail. I could be wrong with that name, so don't quote me on that, but I believe that's the name of the book, Hellhounds on Their Trail. And basically, it goes into all the very strange occurrences in the music industry. And of course, I'm talking about the 27 Club, of course, which had the musicians who were 27 years old and unfortunately all passed away. It's one of the chapters in that book called the 27 Club, and it talks about, like I mentioned, Cobain, Hendrix, Morrison, Mama Cass, Brian Jones, on and on and on it goes. And it also talks about the some of the stuff, I guess, is not real, of course. Although I've never tried it. If you the real meaning behind the White Beatles White Album, you play a record backwards. They also talk about the Down by the Crossroads, Robert Johnson supposedly selling his soul to the devil, all that stuff. It's a very interesting read. If I have the title wrong, I do apologize, but it mentions a lot of that 27 Club. And again, with this unfortunate death, it just brings to mind so many of the great people that we've lost during the 90's, who are so special to us, who for some of us were idols, for some of us we looked up to a lot, for some of us were just you know the people who helped create the music of our youth. And along with Mark Lanegan, I'm also talking about the great number of ones that we've lost, whether it's Scott Weiland, Chris Cornell, Shannon Hoon, Peter Steele, um, Kurt Cobain, Lane Stalley, and all the other musicians who we've lost during that time. And it's always sad, of course, that they're no longer with us. You always kind of wonder, I think, two things. Imagine if they were still here and they were still involved in music. What would they be turning out? What would they be part of? Would they have solo projects? Would they still be with the band they were with that had become so famous? Would they have another band or another various other groups that we see so many musicians have? It always comes to mind. Um, those are the thoughts. What would they be doing in their later years? Still young, and of course, most likely still churning out great music. As we've seen, musicians who are still with us, thank God, that still do that. Whether it's various members of Metallica, or Billy Corgan, the Smashing Pumpkins, Green Day, all these other groups that are still going strong, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and still putting out good music, putting out a lot of great content in this strange time that we live in, where obviously the music is not the same, the technology is not the same, and the way to go about finding a lot of good new music is not the same. So it's always interesting to wonder about where these people would have been with everything that have changed. And I guess for the most part, I would just give my opinion and just say that I don't think them being the musical geniuses that they are, and they probably most likely never would have changed their style. They would have just been doing what they were doing, putting out that wonderful music and content, and continuing to do what they do best, which always kept them at the top of the game, in my opinion. And I kind of feel that the '90s, to some extent, never gets to do it really deserves, especially in this current time, because we see so many acts that are still going strong today, like Metallica, Smashing Pumpkins, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and a lot of the younger people have no concept of where they came from, to some extent. Not all, but some. It's like kind of like when you run into those cats that have the Guns N' Roses t-shirts on that are much younger, and you kind of wonder how much about the band they kind of know, and you ask them, "What's your favorite song?" And they really don't know. "What's your favorite album?" They really don't know. Um, I just bought the shirt. It's kind of cool. What are we talking about here? I mean, come on, man. I just think in all things you should always know your history, and music, of course, is one of those aspects of knowing your history, because there's a reason why things are the way they are in music. And you have so many musicians today that have paid homage or continue to pay homage to so many groups that were prominent more or just starting out in the '90s. And a lot of those groups had set the stage for all things from there. So and that just goes back through time too. Like we said, like I've said in earlier episodes, that so many of the people that we love, whether it's the Doors or whether it's the Beatles or whomever, they all have groups and musicians or styles of music that they looked up to before them or while they were coming up, that had helped have a hand in forming who they were as either a musician singular or a band, and helped on the sound that they would create. And it's always important to read into that to see where a musician or a band has gotten their influences from, whether it's from blues, whether it's from rock, whether it's from jazz. Um, it's or maybe all of them for that matter. So it's always interesting to see. But again, when you think about all these people that we've lost from the '90s, I mean, it's mind-boggling for the most part, and of course disappointing for these musicians, loved ones, their families, their friends, and of course we fans. It's always sad to hear, and you kind of also wonder about, at one time, all these guys were alive and churning music out, especially in that Seattle scene. I think that of took the brunt of all this. I mean, think about it: Lane Stalley, Kurt Cobain, Chris Cornell, Mark Lanegan. They all passed on now, and they were the lead men for four of the most, so many of the most wonderful acts that we've ever seen come along during that time. And they, I mean, well, for the most part, Chris Cornell, Mark Lanegan had extensive solo careers past their bands, and had found a lot of luck with that, which is always good to hear. It it's amazing that you know that area took the brunt, of course. But I guess that comes with genius and it comes with greatness. As I've mentioned before, I always find that a lot of these artists were able to take the demons that they battled with, the suffering that they battled with, whether it be something from one experience or many, and have always found a way to reach down low and turn something positive out to the world or create something in terms of art that everyone can appreciate for the remainder. And it's timeless. And it's very, I think it's rare that we have that. And it's also bittersweet, like most things. So it would also be an amazing fact, imagine if you were to have a 90s fest today and nobody was gone and you were able to have this wonderful Ozfest like concert where all these acts were together for 2 to 3 days, as you see very rarely these days. Although they have these wonderful festivals, we don't have them here in New York, of course, and I don't know why, like we used to. But imagine if you were able to have a Woodstock like type of festival with all acts primarily from the 90s, and no one had ever passed on. I mean, can you imagine being at a concert that consisted of bands like the Stone Temple Pilots or Alice in Chains and Soundgarden, uh, Typo Negative, Screaming Trees, uh, on and on. On and on the list goes. And at one time, it's funny to think that there were festivals in the 90s that had these, especially the second Woodstock, of course, which had so many different bands. But imagine having a 90s fest and nobody is gone. I mean, what's better than that? So again, it's always when you reflect back on the ones that we've lost, it's yet extremely sad, bittersweet, and amazing that from that time period we've lost so many of them. And I guess in a sense, it also kind of, in some strange way, shape, or form, how it is with death sometimes is that it allows you to kind of appreciate the person or the people even more that you've lost, because now you're looking back at a time when they were alive and what they did. And like most human beings do, sometimes we don't know what we have until it's gone, especially in this world, this crazy world, and especially in the field of music where their music is always playing, man, no matter what, whether it's on lithium, whether it's several other stations that we have today via satellite radio, or maybe a regular radio station, although I don't really know many of the regular radio stations that play the music that we love. But because I know the 90s station that they have on Sirius is good, but it doesn't primarily play a lot of the bands we're talking about. There's a lot of pop and shit like that in there that just doesn't really go hand in hand with the music in which we're talking about. But if you listen to Lithium, you definitely get it. Or sometimes you get it on Turbo there. I think that's station number 42, or there's a couple other stations that do have it. But it's always again, those 10 years from 90 to 2000, I think, are 10 years that are frozen in time in my mind. And for the most part, I'll say a lot of that special timing came from the early 90s, probably to the mid to late 97, 98, where at one time all this music was just being pumped out. I mean, when you think about it, the albums that came out of that time frame, man, whether it was Pearl Jam, doing 10, or Nirvana doing Nevermind, or Soundgarden, um, or Typo Negative, or Metallica in 91 with the Black Album. Can you imagine, how do you think back about it, when there used to be a thing you used to do. You used to, go to the record store and kind of look at what was coming out. You used to look at the ratings in a magazine or a newspaper and see where an album was standing in terms of sales. And, again, being young at the time, you don't take into consideration that all these wonderful albums that are standards for greatness today were out at the same time and were brand new, or were just, coming to the shelves. And they're on this chart where they're kind of listed numerically in, and sales. But when you look at it as a whole, it's amazing that they were all there. So again, like at this one time, you had all these bands just pumping out content left and right. Even in terms of videos, where we didn't have the luxury sometimes of seeing all the videos for songs that bands had. But for the most part, if you were watching MTV, you'd see several videos from a lot of these bands that we love, whether it was Hole, or Nirvana's famous "Smells Like Teen Spirit" video, or Pearl Jam's famous "10" video, or Soundgarden's "Black Hole Sun." So you could sit there for a good amount of time and see all these videos come up. So the music was everywhere. Even again, one of what I always found to be one of the funniest things, and in my opinion, one of the greatest shows ever created by the great Mike Judge. These videos also took place on the great Beavis and Butthead, when they would used to sit in front of the TV and kind of watch the music TV videos and kind of criticize or sing along with the videos. I mean, it was even there; it was everywhere. The cover of Rolling Stone, the cover of other different magazines, the billboards, the record stores. At one time, everything was being turned out, and you could walk into somebody's room back in the day in the 90s, and on their wall you'd see the famous 10 poster with all the members of Pearl Jam together, or you'd see Smashing Pumpkins, something, maybe it was Siamese Dream or whatever, poster of Bush. You'd look around their collection of music, and you'd see all the CDs from all the bands we love. Again, I say all this because it's a short amount of time frozen in eternity, I think. And it is the one of the most special times there ever was, very similar to the 1960s. And I always say it was our 60s. And it's always sad to lose one of the many great artists that we had from that time, who was very prominent and who was still turning out music, um, uh, uh, you know, a lot, and who also had ventured into other areas, writing books. And again, that's another thing too. We've seen so many of these musicians go into writing, which always just kind of seems hands in hand. And the many wonderful books that I'm thinking about, that I've kind of mentioned already, has come from a lot of these great musicians. So Mark Lanegan, the various books that he's written, Slash writing the book about his life, Duff, two books that he's written that I mentioned in my last episode. Scott Weiland had the book Not Dead, Not for Sale, which was very interesting. And on and on and on the list goes. I mean, you see them venturing out. I mentioned Flea being an actor. Uh, I mentioned the great Maynard James Keenan, who was also an actor in the movie Crank, I believe, for a quick second. Also being, a wine connoisseur, opening up restaurants. It's always wonderful to hear these things, that you appreciate the artist even more because they have so many more outlets. And we're thankful. I'm thankful, at least, for the fact that we still have these guys around who are still going strong. I know, speaking of Tool, they'll be in concert, I think, tonight at that new arena in Long Island. I won't be able to get there, unfortunately. USB, whatever it's called, where that shit squad, the Islanders, play. All like Long Island fans just got angry at me. Sorry, I'm a Ranger diehard. Take it and live with it. But it's always great, and how lucky we are to still have these wonderful acts going strong. And again, I think it's something that the younger generation may not understand, but when we lose one of these musicians who was part of that wonderful time, it absolutely sucks, because it's something that we're unfortunately used to. And it seems to happen in such a short span of time. I mean, we lost Scott Weiland, Chris Cornell, Peter Steele in, not too many years in between them. I think Peter Steele was, 2007. Weiland was not too long after that. And then Chris Cornell. So, we lost them in a certain span of time. And it hits you over time. It hits you even more as a fan, that when you look back and you're listening to the music or something, and you kind of you say, wow, they're not here anymore. That absolutely sucks. And I think, one of the ones that comes to mind that was so shocking was the death of Kurt Cobain back in the day. He died at only 27 years old when the band was still at their high point. They, after putting out, In Utero, and then they had that wonderful MTV Unplugged, and from the Muddy Banks of the Wish Car, and his unfortunate death happens. It sent the music world into a downward spiral of shock. Then, of course, came the death of Lane Stalley, which, of course, was extremely unfortunate as well. And on. The list just keeps going. And again, a lot of what these guys had in common was obviously battling through their demons for whatever they may have been. And you always appreciate them even more for going through the battle, putting up with it for an extreme amount of time. And, maybe obviously their life ended too short, and maybe the demons had a hand in it, but I don't want to say that they lost their battle. You know, I think maybe, you know, you always want to be respectful of what went on. I don't like to say that they lost their battle. I like to just remember them and hold them up high for doing the battle. Because for those of us like myself that don't know what it's like, I have no concept of the strength it takes to battle those demons, nor what it takes for the loved ones around you to deal with it. And of course, we've all heard stories about it, but we don't know. Hopefully, we don't know what it's like personally. Even more of a reason why you have to appreciate these human beings, because of what they were going through while they were in the process of writing this wonderful music, putting this wonderful music together, assembling a band, maybe going on tour, endless amounts of cities, and endless amounts of shows. That's another thing too. Back in the day, bands used to just do show after show. There was no joke. And this goes back even, like, much, much, much farther. Being the huge Elvis fan that I am, if you are familiar with the great King, you'll know that back early in the day, he was doing show after show. He was even doing shows in different cities across the South, which was crazy because he had to drive from one city to the next. This is, before the travel was so much better for musicians, but they would have to. And even when he was in Vegas and was the main staple in Vegas, I mean, if it wasn't for Elvis, there would be no Vegas acts. Let's face it. He was doing 3 shows a night. That's crazy. He was doing an afternoon show. He was doing an evening show and a late show. That's crazy. And can you imagine being a musician or a group like that, having just to keep turning out material, perhaps changing up the sets, um, doing back to back nights, maybe doing back to back nights in several cities, or you get a night off, but you're in a different, you got a flight. I mean, it's insane, man. It's insane. We don't take that into consideration, sometimes when we reflect back on how important these guys were, man, and the stress it comes. Plus, the stress of just being part of an everyday group, working with the same people over and over, disagreeing with the same people. Sometimes, a lot of the time, when you have multiple heads at once going for, involved in a project, it's a lot of different opinions. So you have to kind of deal with that and, navigate the waters correctly. But again, man, it just sucks that we keep losing these wonderful musicians, from this wonderful time. And I really hope that I would really love to see a 90s fest come together where we have just this 2 or 3 days that just show us all the great music from the 90s that we still have, and all things 90s. It would be really nice to have that. I would love to have something like that in New York. Valerie Mendelssohn, what the hell are you waiting on? Still waiting for you with that. But yeah, I just wanted to take this episode to kind of reflect on the greats that we have lost, and how thankful and honored we were to have them, and how thankful and honored I am, at least, to, as I'm sure you all feel the same exact way, is to still have their music that will remain timeless throughout eternity, that we can always go back to. So you've been hanging with the beast. I shall be getting back to you with more content, trying to pump out more content as much as I can. I want to thank you all for listening. Please go to the YouTube channel and subscribe. I hate to keep saying that. I sound like a friggin' parrot. Right? Go to the YouTube channel, subscribe. but I'd really appreciate it. And again, I'd love to hear from you, whether you agree or disagree, or I don't know, you want to tell me that you mow the lawn naked or something like that. It's all good. But it's been good. Be well. Peace.